Fear can cause people to hoard. Blockchain would allow for transparency that could alleviate those fears. Understanding the trivergance of AI, Internet of Things, and blockchain can transform your thinking, even those resistant to change. Today's guest is Don Tapscott. Don is one of the world's leading authorities on the impact of technology on business and society, having authored 16 widely read books, including the global bestseller Blockchain Revolution, How the Technology Behind Bitcoin and Other Cryptocurrency is Changing the World, now translated into 20 different languages. He is currently co-founder and executive chairman of the Blockchain Research Institute, an adjunct professor at INSEAD, and recently a two-term Chancellor of Trent University in Ontario and a member of the Order of Canada. I'm your host, Chris Parker, and this is the Easy Pray Podcast. Don, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray Podcast today.
My pleasure.
Can you give myself and the audience a little background about who you are and what you do?
Who I am. What do I do? Well, professionally, I guess that because I do other things, I'm in a band. It's called Men in Suits.
Nice.
Yeah, we're a charity band. We probably raised, $5-6 million for good causes. But setting that aside, professionally, I started studying the digital age when I was working for Canada's Bell Labs in the 1970s. I know I'm dating myself here. And we had this, it was Bell Northern Research. We had this crazy idea that everybody would use a computer and it would be connected to a vast network of networks. And back then, the only people who used computers were programmers. Secretaries didn't even use computers. So I wrote a couple of books. We did a lot of research. I wrote a couple of books in the 1980s on that experience. My mother bought most of the copies. But I started writing some bestsellers in the early 90s. Paradigm Shift in 93 was obviously a big book. And The Digital Economy 94 was the year, one of the first bestsellers about the web. And based on that, I set up a think tank. And we do syndicated research, meaning we get a bunch of companies that put some money, 150, 200K into a pot each. We have millions of dollars, and then we investigate something. We've done a dozen of these big programs over the years, and they've led to a bunch of other big books, Wikinomics, The Naked Corporation, Growing Up Digital, and so on. And my most recent incarnation of this is the Blockchain Research Institute, where we have 80 companies and we're doing 130 projects investigating how the trivergance, that you heard it here first, the convergence of blockchain, AI, and the Internet of Things is changing business and society. And what are all the big challenges in getting there?
That's amazing. My internet history starts in the mid 90s, working for a company that, back in the fast days of a T1 internet connection, that we brought on our mail order computer catalog, went online in the early 90s. And this was the amazing new internet. And I'm definitely, maybe not necessarily a child of the internet, but an adult of the internet.
Yeah, well, T1, that was blazing fast back in the day. I mean, we started at 1,200 bits per second. And then we got to 9,600 bits per second, and that was like raging. And, of course, now we're many hundreds of thousands times faster.
I think my first modem was on a Commodore 64, Commodore 128, a 300 baud modem, where it took 4 or 5 minutes to connect to, I don't even know who the internet service provider was. Yeah.
Actually, I remember 300 bits per second. Now that I'm pushing the dark recesses of my mind to pull that one up. And in the 1970s, I had a computer in my home connected to a modem. It was a dumb terminal. And, we did these controlled experiments where we had 50 people who essentially got Microsoft Office. Okay, this is 1979 on a dumb terminal. We built it. And then we had 50 people who used telephones and paper diaries and calculators and secretaries and typing pools and all the rest of that. And we found that the people who used the technology worked very differently. They had more fun, but the big thing was they communicated differently.
Mm-hmm.
And so I said, I think computers are going to become a communications tool. And for at least half a decade, a lot of people made fun of me, saying that managers and professionals will never use computers, and they certainly will never be a communication tool. So anyway.
And now it's the ubiquitous communication.
Yeah.
I mean, people don't make phone calls anymore. It's texting, emailing.
Yeah. Well, not to go too far down memory lane, but the big reason people said that managers will never use computers?
No, I don't. Tell me.
Managers will never learn to type. I would do an executive briefing and I would have people say to me, do I look like a secretary to you? There's no way I'm ever going to learn how to type. If you were a manager and you sat down at a typewriter in an office, hey, Bob, is your secretary dead or something? It was such an unthinkable thing that a manager or professional would put their hands on a keyboard. It's hard to imagine that today. Of course, CEOs type with their thumbs, dictate into devices. But anyway.
So do you see that almost the societal influence being the more difficult change when it comes to technology advancement is that it's the people kind of at the top going, I'm not gonna type, as being the thing that's holding things back, or is kind of rolling over everybody?
I mean, that's always been the case, that this new generation of technology, the trivergance, represents a new paradigm, if I may use that word. And a paradigm is a mental model, and they put boundaries around what we think. They constrain our actions. They're often so strong that we don't know that they're there. And then something can, the earth is at the center of the universe. The big problem in the world is communism. Remember that one?
Mm-hmm.
The purpose of computing is to automate existing business processes with the goal of reducing headcount. Secretaries type, and something can happen in art, science, culture, technology, whatever, that causes a change to occur. And when that happens, these things are received with coolness or worse, because they cause disruption, dislocation, vested interest fight against change. And we, as we record this, there's this searing evidence of what I just said going down in the U.S. Congress, where as part of the infrastructure bill, they want to pass a law that would tax and cause various players in the industry to report all of their transactions to governments for taxation purposes, with the goal of raising $28 billion for the infrastructure bill. This would include people like miners and proof of stake validators, decentralized exchanges, all of whom would have absolutely no way of complying with this law.
Mm-hmm.
And if they push forward with the law, which hopefully they will not, in a strict way, this would wipe out the industry in the United States. So this deep lack of knowledge about how this decentralized finance world works by our government is threatening to kill the innovation economy in the United States. People have not really noticed this right now, but the flak is really hitting the fan. And I'm very hopeful that there will be some kind of compromise amendment to that. If you're a centralized crypto exchange like Coinbase, you know who your customers are. Sure, you should report them. That's a good law. People ought to pay their taxes. Nobody's trying to evade taxes here. But if you're working as part of this vast network that enables clever code and cryptography to achieve trust and to create assets and clear and settle transactions and keep records and so on, the network does that. You can't possibly comply with a law like that. So there's a big need when you have a paradigm shift like this for leadership. And we're starting to see some leadership in Congress, which is very positive.
Do you think that historically, I'm trying to think of where there's been other cases where you have, politicians that they don't necessarily understand the technology. So when it comes to writing laws about it, they don't even know what it was.
History is rich with such stories. I mean, in the early days of the automobile industry in the UK, the government, it was a regional government, adopted the red flag laws, which meant if you're going to go in a horseless carriage, you got to have a driver, a navigator, and a guy up front walking, carrying a red flag so that it would scare the horses. I remember proposals in the early days of the internet that anyone who had an IP address needed to have a CB license.
Oh my goodness!
And so what we have today is the equivalent of of ISPs having to report on every single activity that occurred on the internet. Back in the early 1990s. I mean, it's just obscure. And history is just full of great examples of people, famous last words, people who said, no, 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 no. And they didn't understand the paradigm. Again, I'm old enough to remember in the 70s when, I guess it would have been the early 80s when Ken Olsen, who was the CEO of Digital Equipment Corporation, which was neck and neck with IBM for being the biggest computer company in the world, said there's no way that anyone would need a computer in their home. That goes down in the category of famous last words. So this is a big problem. New paradigms cause a crisis of leadership. And to get to your question, this is my life history. Mm-hmm. Trying to find the leaders that can embrace a new paradigm to make it happen.
And so do you see lawmakers now, or at least their staff now, starting to have a better understanding of tech, at least in terms of let's legislate responsibly and appropriately?
Yeah. I mean, there are lots of really good examples of actual members of Congress that sort of get this. And we've got Senator Wyden, Toomey, and Loomis, who proposed an amendment to narrow the definition of a broker as part of this legislation. And this shouldn't be a partisan thing. They're all Republicans, mm-hmm. but Democrats should be just as on board with this, because we all have common interests in advancing an innovation economy. And, from my writings, my TED Talk and public stuff, my recent TED Talk and public stuff like that, that we view this as the second era of the internet. Mm-hmm. First era, we had for 40 years was the internet of information. But if I send you some information, a PDF, a photo, I'm actually sending you a copy. And that works great for information, but it doesn't work great for assets.
Yeah.
Like money or securities or deeds or contracts or our identities or intellectual property or art or music or votes and assets, something of value that belongs to somebody. Copying those is a bad idea. You don't want someone copying your vote or your identity. And if I send you $1 million, it's really important that I don't still have the money. Right?
Yes.
So that's what blockchain solves. It enables people to trust each other peer to peer, and trust is not achieved by a bank or a stock exchange or a broker or a social media company. It's achieved by cryptography and some clever code. So that's why we call it, we're moving from an internet of information to an internet of value. This is a truly transformational and historical development. And, countries where government leaders don't get this right are really going to hurt themselves going forward.
In what ways do you see the countries hurting themselves when the political leadership isn't on board?
Pick an industry that's going to suffer. Supply chains. This is a transformational technology. Think about it. First of all, a pandemic showed weaknesses in our supply chains that are very structural. I mean, we still today, for all this stuff, all these things we can't get. It's like 18 months later. And people hoard. Why do people hoard? They hoard out of fear and lack of transparency. If we had supply chains that revealed information, nobody's going to buy 3 years of toilet paper if you know some more is coming tomorrow.
Yeah.
So our systems for health data, this is part of why this pandemic happened, is that all this, our health data, which includes real-time stuff now, is buried in all these silos. If we had a universal a blockchain-based health record where anonymized data could be shared, we could be fighting public health problems like a pandemic. So, and a supply chain, you got trains and boats and planes and trucks and various agents and escrow agents and borders and tax authorities and using all these traditional systems like EDI and ERP, and there's paper flying around everywhere and faxes and people making phone calls. Imagine if that were a shared network state, single version of the truth, real-time transactions. There would be no payment and settlement period of 3 days, because the payment and the settlement is the same activity. It's just a change to the ledger. So this could revolutionize our entire economy. That's one of 50 industries and areas that we're investigating at the Blockchain Research Institute.
You talked about health, and do you see like a pushback from the public on bringing health records onto blockchain for fear of, if it's about transparency, there's, yes, you want transparency between your healthcare providers being able to see all your medical records, but you don't want, there's the fear of the government knowing your health history, or, people now, I'm going to charge you more because your health histories, or how do you balance that kind of transparency and privacy?
Well, blockchain is not the problem to that. It's the solution. Right now, the problem exists. Our health records are communicated in violation of our basic rights to privacy all over the place. There are all kinds of examples of someone that went through a series of job interviews. They're looking really good. They did a reference check. They know all their references are awesome. They don't get the job. Failed the reference check. Someone found out that, you take a medication for depression or something like that. So, and plus the fact that all these systems are based on central servers, so they can be hacked. And they are. Our health records are always being released. There are two types of these servers, those that have been hacked and those that will be hacked. And the thing about blockchain is you can have your cake and eat it too. You can have appropriate transparency where you, as a user, get to decide who you're going to reveal to what. As part of a self-sovereign healthcare record, maybe I'm going to say, if I'm found unconscious somewhere, I will provide all pertinent health information to any certified healthcare professional. Check. So you could manage your transparency, but you might also say, I want to anonymize my history with leukemia, and I want to make that available for science. Or I'd like to sell it to Pfizer anonymously, and I'd like them to pay me for it. Or, I'd like to get a second opinion and ship that off to another doctor or another institution or something like that. We can manage our own privacy, but we can and have secure and private systems. But we can also manage appropriate levels of transparency as well. Only blockchain can deliver that.
As you were talking, I was thinking of privacy settings on our apps and on our social media accounts, and wondering if people that have a hard time understanding what I'm sharing with a friend and what I'm sharing with the world on Facebook, are they going to be able to transition to handling, let's just talk about privacy, health data, each of those different checkboxes for what I'm willing to share with under what circumstances? Or is that just part of that sociological change that has to happen?
Well, I think it's a fair enough point. Um, this is not all just going to happen.
Yeah.
It's going to get created by people everywhere, by the technology companies that do this, by wise and smart government leaders that understand the opportunity, by civil society organizations that are fighting for our rights, and as individuals as well. It takes time for us to figure stuff out. Right now, you got a third of the American population that thinks that the most scrutinized election in American history was fake. And they think that based on something that somebody said, as opposed to looking at all of the evidence. So, people will do and think what they want to do. And it's going to require a big process of engaging people to understand what needs to be done.
Yeah, it's not like the internet, what we've seen in the last 40 years. It's not like that happened all in 3 minutes.
No. Yeah,
so
exactly.
So the trivergence of blockchain, AI, and Internet of Things, it's not like, we have it set on the calendar for December 31st, 2021, right. January 2022, everything changes.
Yeah, no, exactly right. And you know what? Over the years, we all learned to type, didn't we?
Yep. Even if only with our thumbs. So what industries do you think that have not adopted blockchain are kind of the next in line to start implementing blockchain on a kind of an industry-wide scale?
Well, everybody's adopting it at different levels, and there's a lot going on that is just not publicly known. And some big companies are pretty proprietary about this stuff because they know it's going to deliver a big advantage to them. But you just pick an industry. I mean, I'm excited. I'm speaking in the first week of September. I'm going to get on an airplane, and crazy stuff. You go up in the sky. And I'm going to Houston to give the first face-to-face speech I've given in a while to what was called the Oil and Gas Blockchain Consortium. It's now called Blockchain for Energy, something like that. And there'll be pretty much every big oil company, at least in North America, and a lot of them in the world there. I'm the opening speaker, and they asked me to just lay out a vision on how this industry will be transformed, and I'm doing that. But there are others that have been slow. The telecom industry, you think, would have been one of the first up for this, but it's a problem of leaders of the old paradigm that they think about the world in terms of information, not in terms of assets. So they're missing lots of big opportunities there. So, but I mean, you pick in the industry, and I can tell you where it's at and what are the good things that are happening, and where there are impediments. I'll tell you one thing though, that a lot of people say, "Well, is this really happening?" Because it sure seems like it's taking a long time. To your earlier point, it is taking a long time. You know what? These are big changes.
Yeah.
Today, you want to do something with the internet. You want to sell some stuff online, create a company, call up Shopify. They have a rep, send you a bunch of stuff. You sign a thing. 3 days later, you're buying and selling with a great dashboard on who's buying everything all around the world. You want to implement a blockchain to transform manufacturing. You're talking about changing the deep structure and architecture of the corporation. You're talking about the trivergence where you got AI and additive manufacturing, the Internet of Things with 3D printing. You're Boeing, you're going to be printing parts in a factory remotely. And we're also talking about transforming the whole manufacturing supply chain, of which you are just one player. So you get all your partners involved. You got to have standards. You got to agree. What's a bill of lading? What's an invoice? And so, this is going to take a while. And the reason is not because blockchain is unimportant. The reason is it's so transformational. You're messing with very profound institutions and structures and processes that are at the heart of our entire economy. I mean, just take financial services. Now, DeFi, most of what banks do today can be done by software. Now, they're not going to be replaced because they're the smart ones that figured that out. And they're all over this, trying to create new value in the middle, which they will do. And some will be successful and some will disappear. But I called it re-intermediation in the digital economy, the creation of new value in the middle. That was one of these terms that never caught on. I kind of thought it was a good term, 1995. But maybe nothing so powerful as a term whose time to be coined has come. There.
And
we just created a new law. Anyway.
I mean, I definitely see that there are industries that will be resistant to change. I spent probably 15 years associated with the life insurance industry. Yeah. And they are even to this day, very paper-based. Yeah. It's, no, we have our processes that have worked for the last 100 years with life insurance. We're going to keep doing these things. Yeah. And I've seen, I work with some people that are trying to push up against that envelope of like, no, you've got to change. And some industries are just very, very resistant to that change.
Well, go to blockchainresearchinstitute.org, and we've released a bunch of our reports under Creative Commons, including a couple about the life insurance industry, where you can read about the actual changes that are happening. The other thing is Alex Tapscott, my co-author on Blockchain Revolution, also a relative, my son. We have had this unbelievably joyous collaboration. He's got a new book called The Financial Services Revolution, relatively new this year, and it's available on Amazon. And it kind of digs into all the different aspects of the financial services industry as well.
Yeah, that's gonna be an interesting one to see when some of these really old, 100-year-old companies that have not kind of caught up with the digital age are either going to have to change very rapidly, or they're going to get eclipsed by some younger company that's just like, hey, we don't want to do it the old way. And rather than having to rebuild everything that exists, we're just going to start from a tech beginning, and this is going to go a lot faster than some of these entities are used to moving.
Yeah. Anyway, great to chat with you.
Great to chat with you as well. For those that are interested in your Men in Suits band and the charities that you help raise money for, where can they find out about that?
Well, the website is meninsuitsmusic.com. And the Blockchain Research Institute is www.blockchainresearchinstitute.org or .com.
And are you on social media and able to be found on social media?
Oh, yeah. I'm D Tapscott on Twitter. And I also have a public Facebook and Instagram page as well. And they're easy to find me.
And we'll make sure to link those in the show notes. Don, thank you so much for coming on the Easy Pray podcast today.
Great chat. And thanks so much.
Thank you, Don. Have a great day. Thank you for listening to this episode of the Easy Pray podcast. If you found this episode helpful, please share this with someone you know and leave a review at easypray.com/review. Notes and a transcript of this episode with Don Tapscott can be found at easypray.com/82.